Hello and welcome to Breaking Embargo. I'm Peter Barnes. That's Morgan Brobyn. Let's get into it. Morgan, thanks so much for joining me, mate. It's an absolute pleasure to see you again. We've been veterans of the Westminster scene for too long. I think, you get less for murder under Keir Starmer in this country now than we've spent in Westminster. How you doing?
It can also feel like that being involved in politics sometimes, can't it? But yeah, we've been around for a while. There's a lot has changed, hasn't it, over the years?
Oh,
I
God.
mean, it's a very, very different environment politically, socially, economically, even since we met. When did we first meet? Back in what, 2016, something like that?
Yeah, I think the dinosaurs had just died out then.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them are still knocking around Westminster, though. It's been a very turbulent decade, hasn't it? All of us.
It really has. Because that's the thing. I think when we really first started getting involved, like professionally, not just like involved in like interested, but actually professionally, there was somewhat of a structure, and then something happened, and it just blew up. And then everybody kind of dissipated. And I know a lot of people blame COVID, but my thing with COVID was always it exacerbated the inevitable. That somehow we were always going to end up in these absolute catastrophes that we find ourselves in politically as a country now. That somehow people are looking for the easy excuse. I think that's a big problem that we have.
I think I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because when you go back to pre-COVID, everything was very predictable. You had, I like to call it a 2.5 party system. I've never said we have a 2-party system. 2.5. Liberals being the 0.5, and then the Tories and Labour, and then it switches. And you kind of knew where you were. Occasionally, obviously, we had once upon a time when the Liberal Democrats rather, were the kingmakers under Nick Clegg. But it was predictable. That was the most shocking thing you had, was a coalition government. And they created the role of deputy prime minister. That doesn't mean anything constitutionally. But now, I mean, even if you don't, without even taking the devolves into consideration, even Westminster politics, or UK politics, if you will, is completely unpredictable. And I think that COVID is not to blame for that, but I think it sort of acted as a catalyst, because people broke during that time. People haven't recovered from that. And I think it's probably released the pressure valve once the lockdown was over, and then everyone started to really analyze the details and the actions that certain governments took, and why we did this. Why did we play COVID pantomime? Why did I have to wear a mask to walk over to a bar, and then I could go back, take the mask off, even though the bar person was, like 4 meters away. And if I had a little pass on that said I had anxiety, I didn't have to wear it at all. That kind of COVID pantomime, I think it really played with people's minds, and it opened up their ability to critically question just the status quo in general.
Yeah, I think that's really true, actually, that, everybody suddenly had a moment to stop. I think that's what it was. And I think that moment of people stopping suddenly realized for so many that, wait a minute, that's nonsense. There's a number of things that you would naturally go along with. I always said when the COVID started that the government would have trouble getting people to do things. We don't like being told what to do as Brits. We genuinely don't. You put a sign in front of us saying, don't push that button. 99% of us are not just pushing it, we're hitting the thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why you had the nudge department. You had all this kind of coercive kind of behavior things. Because I'm not being funny. It is needed, to a degree. But I do think that it's that kind of, we certainly always had a low expectation of our government and our politicians, but I think it was laid bare, just how incompetent so many people were, but also just the behavior of the media became very apparent, and I obviously Brexit, I think, broke down that even more. But I think the COVID situation just plowed right through any kind of pretense of impartiality, any kind of pretense of, we're going to try and look at things evenly. I do think the media's role in our kind of situation where we find ourselves in is never discussed very much.
It isn't, and they played a crucial role in it, because at the end of the day, we relied on, in terms of compliance, all the different restrictions and the interpretations of the very rushed and careless COVID legislation that was put through that obviously compelled police police authorities throughout the country through the different forces to apply. They were interpreted, ad hoc by different sort of forces. For example, only go for a walk or run locally. Well, what does that mean? What does locally mean? If you live out in the middle of nowhere, say mid Wales, and it's one of those sparsely populated regions of the country, local to you is 20 miles away. So it's perfectly reasonable for you to drive 20 miles, go for a run or a walk in a park, and then drive back. But if you're in London, then going from West London to East London, that's perhaps unreasonable. And it was the only time, I think, where the media really enjoyed reporting on the infringements and people breaking lockdown and people doing this. There was a really sinister undertone to it.
I couldn't agree more. It was that kind of scarlet letter thing that, that was it. You've got to go for them, that, you're killing grandma kind of thing. That narrative that they helped foster and they ran with for pure profit. Let's be real. Most of the journalists that I know anyway, they said that it was all nonsense. They knew
they were breaking what was going on. They were breaking
half of them were. Yeah. Kate Burley, for example, over at Sky. How she was not fired, and then she had the audacity to think that she had a leg to stand on when she's giving other people a lecture. I'm sorry, I always think that is the downfall of so much of society, is the lack of self-awareness. It is a killer. It really is.
No, I mean, I completely agree, but also reeked of classism, because some of it, because if you're fortunate enough to live in a detached property with I'm talking about the elite classes, not so much the middle classes, the elite classes. If you're fortunate to live in a detached house with a swimming pool, maybe a home gym, beautiful surroundings, a nice neighborhood, you're probably relatively content for a short to medium period of time to stay home. I know I would be, but if you live in a block of flats and you're confined to that flat, it's not comparable. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the real example of that was Sam Smith when he started crying outside his multi-million-pound flat in West London, and I was like, just shut up. Yeah. But it's interesting that you bring this up, because I think this is one of the big changes in our society, is the detachment, between different groups of people, and obviously we can't not talk about reform. Obviously, I feel like I talk about them more than I talk about anything else these days. But they've been really capable of driving into that sense of it's us versus them. Now, I think it is a very dangerous bit of politics to play with if they're not careful. So far, not a problem with what they're doing in terms of that, but a bad element can wander into that area very easily. But it is interesting that kind of detachment between the leaders and the people and all that narrative, it's really took hold. I mean, more so than anything else I've ever seen. I think Boris helped lay the groundwork to a degree, but obviously Farage and the team there, they've capitalized on it, and it is working.
Well, I mean, why wouldn't they use the strategy? Because it worked perfectly well. I mean, of course, I know that, the Brexit, of course, Reformers could be a completely separate entity of the Brexit Party, and UKIP, and UKIP still exists. But come on, there's a trail there. There's, they're obviously many of the same people of the same ilk. Yeah. But of course, when you go back,
I call it the fellow travellers.
Yeah, the fellow travellers. But, many of these people were around in the vote leave days, the referendum days. And of course, some of them worked for the rival campaign. What was it? Grassroots Out and Leave.eu, and they had their. But of course, they used a very similar tactic, which is to mobilize the disenfranchised. I mean, Dominic Cummings' strategy was all about getting those to vote who never voted. It wasn't about winning over a Remain. You're not going to do it. You're not going to win over a metropolitan elite Remainer to suddenly get them to be a staunch arch sort of leaver. It's about taking that huge chunk of disenfranchised. And they used that tactic. It worked wonderfully. Why wouldn't they use it again? But you're correct. I mean, I agree with you. It's once you tap into that energy, you have to be very careful.
Yeah, because my fear is that Reform have woken up a beast of very angry people that feel very unheard. Somebody started paying attention to them. The minute that might disappear, that movement isn't going anywhere now. Like I said, the beast has woken up, and they have to manage that very carefully because it could be usurped by very bad actors. I don't think Reform are the bad actors at all, but it could be used and weaponized in a way that I would be very concerned about. And I use the same example of the pro-Gaza MPs. It's the same thing. There's an awakening of a movement. There's a beginnings of something there that is potentially very, very dangerous. And I don't think enough people on the right are aware of that. Or if they are aware of it, they're not thinking about it when they do, or more importantly, when they say things. Because like you said, Dom Cummings' great idea was, you're not going to win on the argument. Go find new voters.
Yeah,
because I worked with the Vote Leave lot, and I tell you now, the main mentality behind it was the Brexit referendum was about Brexit for about 15 minutes. Then it became an us versus them. It became establishment versus the people. And unfortunately, Remain were running around about GDP, whilst actually they're talking about things that matter to people on an existential level. And it's about that sense of control, because the one thing these people didn't have in their lives was control. And that's what it was all about. And that messaging is really, really risen up more so now than ever. We're seeing, like, obviously with the decline of Parliament, the courts and all this stuff. But yeah, I could say, because obviously we both were Tories, and I think you've gone more to the Reform side now. And what was it for you that led it that way more than anything?
Well, I mean, I like to think of myself as a critical friend of both the Tories and Reform.
Yeah.
More like a sort of independent centre-right conservative, because I'm not a member of any party.
No.
So, my vote is up for grabs, but it's, me, it's going to be a party on the right. It's going to be either the Conservatives or Reform. Yeah. Of course, where I live is also a factor. I'm going to obviously vote tactically, because we have the first past the post system, which I might, segue nicely into Wales, which has got rid of that.
Yes.
Now. But
don't get ahead of me.
Don't get ahead of you.
It's my show. I don't get to say this often. It's my show.
I think it's going to sound, it will sound pretentious to some, so I'm just going to say it. I didn't leave the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party left me.
You are the 8th person who in these interviews that has said that exact same thing.
Well,
the Conservative Party walked away from them.
Well, I mean, I know that line can be so annoying and sound it could even sound pretentious. But look, I signed up to a party that had these views, these principles, these standards. They moved away from those views, principles, and standards. They displayed sheer incompetence and callousness during the COVID years. In terms of scandal, when we look, some of viewers will remember it, but of course you can just read about it, Google it. The Blair years, the latter years of his leadership, were just riddled with scandal, and that's what brought them down. And that's kind of what happened to Boris. That's what happened to his government, and that just chipped away at the confidence. That wasn't enough to make me leave, because people are fallible. You have corrupt officials, corrupt politicians in all parties, and I don't think there's any. I don't think there's a higher number in one than the other. It just so happens when the spotlight is on you in your government, you can have more scrutiny. I think the proportion of it is equal across all the parties.
Oh, yeah. It's the same with Tories getting on their high horse about Keir Starmer's expenses. I was like, do you remember 2009?
Yeah.
It just happens to be that this... Yeah, there are certain governments are in power at the wrong time, and they have to take the flak for that issue. I've always agreed with that one, actually. But when I was listening to some MPs, I was like, let's go through your expenses, shall we, and see what the public think of you.
Well, I think it was Elon Musk when he said those who complain the loudest often have the most to hide. So when he was, I think he was talking about his days at Apple, or he was referring to something that happened at Apple, or you have to check that. So I can't quite remember, but I heard a soundbite where he said it was the ones who were kicking up the most fuss about the auditing that had the most to hide. And usually, if you have an MP that's overzealous, or a politician that's overzealous about dragging someone over the coals, maybe rightly so for what they've done, you have to then wonder, you have to go, well, he without sin cast the first stone.
Yeah. Always. I have this theory that if you're really, really in favor of something, you're a wrong 'un for it. I mean, because you could broaden it out to say, look at the Harvey Weinstein situation. The guy was celebrated for putting women in movies. He was given awards for it.
Yeah.
Look what he was actually like. I have this theory about these kind of moral angels on these like single issues that I'm like, let's look under the bonnet, shall we? And we'll do a bit of an MOT. But it's interesting, really, that that this kind of decline, and I do use the word decline, has really though been used as a motivator by reform to get into the voter base. And I think we see it no more than I think in Wales. Obviously your little homeland, but but let's be real, this is a real test for reform. This is a moment for them. The locals was the beginning, not the end, like some people think it was. Some people think they're now ready for government. I was like, calm down. But taking power at the Senate, that's real. That's real power.
That is real, and there is some promising history for them there, where if you look at UKIP, where they first made their breakthrough, it was in Wales.
Yeah.
That's where they made their first breakthrough in Wales. And I think to outsiders, perhaps, trying to look in, or those who aren't maybe that, interested for it, obviously, to evolve politics, they don't live there or whatever. They tend to just think, well, they've always had a Labour First Minister. They must be doing pretty well. Well, they've always had between 26 and 30 seats. The Senate had 60 seats. Now it's going to have 96. So
I was going to say, there's a whole load of changes, aren't there? That's happening down there. Yeah. I always annoys me no end that we don't get reporting properly in England about what's happening in Wales and Scotland. Not really. Unless it's something terrible, we don't get the news here. So there are real changes and real things that are happening. And I think that's a big problem we have about keeping the country together is that we don't really know what's going on. But sorry, I interrupted you there.
No. That's
a random thought that came into the head.
No, that's a good point. No, I agree with you. And, I think that's why you have Welsh Labour as opposed to Labour, whereas the Conservatives, it's called the Welsh Conservatives, but they're not. They're just the Conservatives with some Welsh branding. Whereas the Welsh Labour Party is a semi-autonomous party. And I think
they have a very rich history, though, don't they? They've got something to really ground them in it that the Conservatives don't have. I've said for a long time, when it comes to regional stuff, the Tories are useless. Scottish Tories, absolutely useless. People celebrate Ruth Davidson, but come on, let's be real. She's a glorified Lib Dem. I don't like playing that game, but she was good at media skills, but
even in Northern Ireland, the Conservatives still officially exist, but they don't contest any seats.
Not really. No.
So what's the point?
They're really confusing. I don't.
So what's the point?
I don't get it. That one I've never understood. But
I think that it's going to go very well for them potentially reform because of the first past the post system going. So what you have now is you still have the regions, which were always elected using the de Hont formula, which is quite a complicated formula to explain, but basically it works on sort of percentiles where it tallies them up and rounds it up. It redistributes the votes across the party. It's a complicated one to explain. But now the constituencies are going to be party, not constituency. So usually in the past, the lesser parties, if you call them, Plaid Cymru to an extent, they are the main opposition or main party, depends on where you are in Wales. But always the sort of smaller parties, they did very well on lists because someone might go, do you know what, I live in Caerphilly, I'm going to vote for the local candidate because I know him or I know her and they're very good, whatever. But I'm going to vote Plaid on the list, or I'm going to vote Lib Dem, or I'm going to vote, some other party that's just doesn't have represent. And sometimes they get in. Now that's completely changed, and there's 96 of those seats up for grabs, all on the party system. Now, people are just going to hear reform. So when they see that on the ballot paper, and it might sound like a very simple sort of answer, but they'll just see reform and they'll vote it twice.
Yeah.
Just go reform. And they will do that. And there's or they just go Tory, Labour.
Yeah. And that's the problem with party-based voting, is that you're voting for the party. And actually, what you really should be is the individual.
That's gone.
It's gone. The entire point of representative democracy is erased by proportional representation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people are saying it's fairer. I was like, it's not. In my opinion,
No,
it's not. I think the way that Welsh are going down this line, I
yeah,
don't think it's fair. I don't think it's good for democracy because you're
neither do I.
just going to get monopoly of party, which is, I think, a very dangerous thing.
And then those individuals who obviously to get those places on the lists, they have to do as you both know, as we've both been
Mm,
party animals, have to do a lot of skullduggery and get the lines up to
yeah.
get those top spots because if you're number one on the list, you're bound to get a you're bound to get a seat. You're just bound to if you're one of the three main parties.
Mm,
Usually, then two, okay, not a decent spot. Three, four, you've no chance. There's going to be so much more internal politics and infighting,
yes.
and you're going to be more beholden to the party. You're not going to be an individual. You're a brand. You are a brand. You are not Joe Blogs, and oh, by the way, they've changed all the constituency names now to just Welsh
Oh,
names, so those have all gone. So that's going to be
yeah.
fun on
We
BBC.
don't stand a chance. We don't stand a chance.
That's going to be hilarious when they try to say those names on BBC.
Oh no, I never thought of that.
That's going to be,
You're
yeah.
gonna have to give me a lesson. You're gonna have to give me a lesson.
I mean, they've done that to Welshify. I mean, they renamed Snowdonia not long ago, but that those personal links with your local MP or Senate member,
Mm.
that's gone. It's more like the parties are in charge, and as you know, reform is effectively Nigel Farage.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
and
so
I just see just a kind of I see all the ingredients going in for a disaster,
yeah.
and everybody keeps making the pie, and I'm like, it's gonna taste terrible. You all know it is. Stop. Just
Could have leaks.
stop.
Could have leaks in it.
Oh no. Sorry, I don't like leeks. They disintegrate. Oh,
You
not
don't
fun.
like leaks?
Not fun.
Oh my God.
No. I like lamb, but that's fine.
So I think that the polling is very positive for them. And I've spoken to, I'm not going to say who they are because they were conversations in confidence, but I've spoken to members of the Senate who are very senior. So they're in the cabinet, who have told me that they are the Welsh cabinet, obviously, they've got Welsh government, so to speak. They are terrified. They
Yeah.
are terrified.
The Welsh, and this is the thing about reform, is that they are a kind of, they're an unstoppable force at the moment. They are just going to tear through these institutions. The problem is, and this is the bit that I bang on about, is, and it's not that I don't like reform, I just think it's a question we should be asking is, when you've teared through and you've torn everything down, what next?
You build. What do you build?
Wales has some, Wales has some big problems. It has some big problems, and we're in a changing world. Yeah. I don't think reform at the moment, and I stress this at the moment, are grown up enough to realize the responsibilities that they're taking on. They're seeing it as tearing down the establishment. That's fine. But what is left in its place? Because this is people's lives. It's homes. I'm
a bit of a history buff. It sort of reminds me of the period of like the French Revolution, where the Robespierre and all that went absolutely bonkers, and then Napoleon had to come in and basically restore order. Because the institutions have been collapsed, just destroyed, but there was nothing in its place. And I think that's kind of what you'll see in Wales, and might even see.
And this actually lends back rather nicely to the point that we've just made about this kind of beast that they've awoken, that want this change, that you've demanded it, they've voted for you, and you're not going to give them anything, or what you're going to give them is not going to be anywhere near what you promised. And I think that is a real danger, because what might happen is either we see the rise of more dangerous aspects of our politics, or complete disengagement. That they said that they put their faith in the last hope, because that's what I think reform really are for a lot of people. And if that hope flame dies, that's it. They're gone. And that's generations of voters gone, which again breeds bad politics.
And there are more sinister political figures out there. I'm not even going to say their names because I don't want to give them oxygen. Who would be more than happy to fill that void.
Yeah, exactly. And it is the threat of that void that, I don't think a lot of people on the right are aware of or are giving enough credit to, because like we said, that's, if Dom Cummings found 3 million, I bet Nigel Farage can find a lot more than that.
Yeah. And it's not also what Nigel Farage has that perhaps maybe some of the Brexit Tories didn't have when it went back to the referendum, is Farage has that pull factor to pull Labour voters over. The Tories didn't have it. Boris Johnson famously, when he said, "Lend me your votes. I know that you're not Tories. You know your grandparents would be spinning in your graves if you voted, but please lend me your votes." And they did, and many of them are let down. You know, we could disagree on that, but they were let down, and those votes will not be coming back for a long time for the Conservatives.
Yeah, I agree, but it's quite interesting actually to bring up the Boris comparison, because whilst Boris he took the Red Wall, he lost lots of the Tory shires to the Liberal Democrats. The threat of Nigel Farage, he potentially, if positioned right, could take both.
Yes.
That's what makes Farage the dangerous factor in a lot of this, is that he's not just a one kind of voter appeal, and I think too many people underestimate that.
I think so, and I think even the dynamic it's a strange dynamic between Tice and Farage, but I think that can play quite well, because I think that Tice probably will appeal a little more to some of those Shire voters.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Lee Anderson definitely wouldn't. Someone like Lee Anderson in Gloucestershire, no, not a chance. But then the problem you then have is you can't build a government like that because it's too siloed. There is no unifier, and this is a point I was making with, I can't remember, one thing I was on and talking about it, that the problem of reform is you're defined by what you're against, not by what you're for. And this is the Rupert Lowe situation through and through.
Oh God, yeah. Just one, for example, one thing there that made me sort of wince a bit at reform was, I know what you're against, but I don't know what you're for, is the whole net zero thing. Look, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Conservatives brought that in. That was a Conservative baby, and even Jake Rees-Mogg, when I think he was could have been a spectator event where he was saying I had to knock on people's doors and defend net zero, and I did support it. This is a Tory baby that Labour inherited. But the one thing that I found really confusing, just showed the whole policy disconnect within reform, is we're going to tax renewable energy. Well, why would you tax it? I thought you were all about getting rid of taxes and putting it down and letting the market decide. If a renewable energy technology becomes more commercially viable, the national grid is upgraded so it can actually take on energy from these projects. That's one of the main problems, actually, why renewable energy isn't successful, because the grid cannot handle it.
Oh, yeah,
it isn't integrated, right? But why would you deter innovation? Why would you tax a renewable energy? That makes no sense. And I think that's just part of the ideological disconnect, and that's the drive. They know what they're against, but they don't know what they're for.
Yeah.
And that was just one policy example.
Yeah, I know. They came into power in all these local councils, and the first thing they started talking about was flags. I mean, I get I get the point they're trying to make. Your family of four, you're struggling to keep the mortgage payment down. You got kids at a failing school, the hospital you can't get an appointment to, and you're talking about a flag. And you're going to say you're talking for the people? You're not. I'm sorry, you're not.
And how about just quietly telling the executive services of because it's not like a local councillor goes up there and wheels the flag. That's not what happens. Just go quietly tell the executive services to take the flag down, replace it. Why do you have to make it? I know,
because this is what they got wrong in Lancashire, where they tried to take the Red Rose of Lancashire down. Now, you don't do that.
No, you
don't. But then again, it just shows that they're ploughing ahead with an idea, not listening, because they think everyone's against them, because criticism is an attack. That's a dangerous place to be. And they're plowing ahead with these policies that they think are really important because they're all agreeing with each other, because they don't listen to anybody else who might be relatively on their side, i.e. me, saying, that's fine, but fix the economy.
Yeah.
Jobs, economy, not flags. You want to be serious? Be serious.
And I think that's going to be the real litmus test, because you had obviously a lot of these, they might be policy wonks now, or staffers, or involved in reform in some way. But many of them were around in the referendum days, and that was easy for them to do because you knew what the objective was, you knew what you were against, and then you could just hand it over to the government of the day, which is the Conservatives, to get it done, which they did badly, to be honest. But then you're kind of you're removed from the process. Now you're behind the wheel. You don't just have to drive. You have to plan. You have to plan the course. You have to actually plan where we're going. And I think that's really going to be interesting to see, and well, interesting is putting it mildly. It's going to be, and it's going to be a bumpy ride. It's going to be.
It is. It really is, and it concerns me the fact that these people have had so long out of power to get this right, and how they look like they've never seen water before, let alone now they're going to go swim the channel. Yeah. It gets me. The level of unpreparedness is stark, I have to admit. But anyway, Morgan, I have taken up nearly half an hour of your time. This has been a great little chat. It's nice to catch up with you and chew the fat. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Please do like, share, subscribe, all the details below, and I'll catch you next time.